U oktobru 2010. godine gost Bogoslovskog fakulteta u Beogradu bio je Đon Ber, profesor i dekan Pravoslavne bogoslovske akademije Sveti Vladimir iz Njujorka. Akademija Svetog Vladimira, danas jedna od dve najcenjenije pravoslavne visokoškolske ustanove zapadne hemisfere, svoj nastanak i prvobitne korene vezuje za 18. vek i prve dolaske pravoslavnih monaha na Aljasku i američki kontinent uopšte. Kao zvanična školska ustanova Sjedinjenih Američkih Država počela je da radi 1905. godine u skromnim uslovima duboko u središtu ruralne Amerike u Minneapolisu. Zahvaljujući donacijama dobrotvora, ovaj privatni koledž danas se nalazi u srcu Njujorka, okružen ogromnim privatnim parkom. Ima bogatu izdavačku delatnost, biblioteku sa 150.000 knjiga, svoju crkvu i nekoliko različitih vežbaonica, studentske sobe i čak 40-ak apartmana za učenje i udoban život sa suprugama i decom svojih eventualno oženjenih studenata. Koledž danas broji stotinak redovnih studenata iz svih delova sveta. Među njegovim bivšim pitomcima za diplomske i postdiplomske radove bili su i jedan današnji patrijarh, 40-ak vladika, mitropolita i profesora i preko 900 sveštenika rasutih po pravoslavnim eparhijama širom sveta. Đon Ber, dekan fakulteta Sveti Vladimir, predaje patrologiju, dogmatiku i tumačenje Biblije. Autor je 5 teoloških knjiga. 3 su prevedene na srpski: Put za Nikeju, Nikejska vera i Tajna Hrista. Boraveći u Beogradu održao je 2 izuzetno zanimljiva i aktualna predavanja: Izazovi naše prošlosti i Zadaci pravoslavne teologije u 21. veku. Đon Ber doktorirao je filosofiju na Oksfordu 1995. godine, da bi potom magistrirao i doktorirao i teologiju, i to na fakultetu na kome je od 2007. godine i dekan. Naš razgovor za emisiju Duhovnici, vođen u biblioteci Beogradskog teološkog fakulteta, započinjemo pitanjem o njegovim akademskim počecima. Mada iz porodice, tradicionalno okrenute crkvi, izgledalo je da će njegova karijera ići sasvim drugim tokom i mimo porodične tradicije. I'm really impressed with your family. A lot of them are in church. Your grandfather was in church.
Yes, on my father's side, my family left Russia after the revolution, and they wandered their way through Europe. And in 1926, my great-grandfather was sent from Bad Kissingen, I believe, to London. He was sent by Metropolitan Theology to serve the church in London. And in fact, he was sent with this cross. This was a cross he was sent with to go. And my father's also a priest. So on my father's side, all Russian and all priests. And on my mother's side, Swiss-German. I come from a Swiss-German background. Her father was a Lutheran minister, and her father actually met his spouse, his wife, at Kalbart seminars in Basel, so theological and churchly on that side. We had a trustee at St. Vladimir's Seminary called Yaroslav Pelikan, and he also had a Russian mother and a Russian father and a German mother. And he would always say that his father told him, "Thank goodness you have a German mind and a Russian soul, and not the other way round." So I feel somewhat the same. I have the advantage of both.
Have you ever been to Russia? Why is
Oh
it, I
yes, many
suppose-
times.
Many
Many
times.
times. Well, over the last few years, as I've become doing more work in theology at St. Vladimir's and as Dean, I was there this January when St. Vladimir's received an international award for the work we've been doing, and I've been at various theological conferences. Yes.
Do you have books translated in Russia?
Yes, I think only 2 at the moment, but they're starting to be translated. Yes. Yeah, the books are translated into Serbian and into Romanian. I don't really think about it that much because I'm always thinking about the next book I'm writing rather than the books I've written in the past. But it is certainly amazing to be here in Belgrade, I visited Sofia a few years ago in Bulgaria, and to be in Russia. I was in India last year, and to be in contact with theologians and church people all the way around. It's really, really remarkable.
Your own brother is, I read somewhere, for
Yes.
20 years now,
Yes.
a monk on Mount Athos.
Yes.
So can you tell us?
My younger brother as well. Which
2 of them.
no, just one.
Just one.
He's my younger brother. And he always points out to me whenever we meet now that he's a higher monk and I'm only an archpriest, so he must stand in front of me. Even if he's a younger brother, he won't stand in front. We are sons of, and my sister, we're children of priests in England, and we have our own history with the church. We all left the church and came back to the church, and his way of coming back was to go to Mount Athos. He went there one time, hadn't really thought much about it, hadn't thought about becoming a monk, but he went there and he simply fell in love with the monastery he went to and the abbot of the monastery.
No, of the monastery, St. Paul's.
Yeah, Igumen Parthenios. In fact, they're both in Romania this week with some relics from the monastery. So,
Can you tell us something about monasticism on Mount Athos?
Mount Athos has been an independent monastic federation for 1,000+ years, over 1,000 years. So it started 1,000 years ago with a few hermits and a few monks, and it soon became a great centre of attraction. Many people came to visit the monks there, and so you see many, many monks on the mountain. You had the Byzantine emperors and other emperors establishing big monasteries, and it became really the bastion of monasticism for Orthodoxy. So there are 20 ruling monasteries, 20 big monasteries, cenobitic monasteries where many monks live together, serving together, worshipping together, working together, and a number of smaller monasteries where maybe you have 6 or 10 or a dozen, and then hermits living by themselves. So it's a wonderful place to go to visit, to see all the Byzantine buildings, to walk around, and to see the spirituality, to feel the spirituality everywhere you go. They don't go there to study theology in the way that I do. I'm an academic and I teach. They don't go there to study theology. If you were to ask them, they would say they go there to live theology. Yeah? So they aim through monasticism to put on Christ more fully, through obedience, through the discipline of the services, through the work, through prayer, through the whole life that they have, which is very, very intense and hard. They put on Christ more fully, and so they become theologians in that way.
Although your family is deeply in church, and a lot of them were priests or monks, I think your decision was not to be a theologist. First you studied philosophy.
Yes, it's a bit more complicated than that. I stopped going to church when I was probably about 12 years old, 13 years old, when my parents said, when I was old enough to stay behind and not have to go to church, and I was allowed to stay at home, my brother as well, my sister, in various ways. And I went off and I did all sorts of other things. I was reading, I was doing all sorts of things. And then one morning I remember waking up, I was 17 years old, I woke up one morning, I said, enough of all of this, I'm off to a monastery. Yeah? And my parents and I'm thoroughly glad they did, and it was a blessing they did, they let me go. They actually let me go. They let me drop out of school, which was quite something, to drop out before you graduated high school, to drop out of school and to go to a monastery. I hadn't thought about monasticism, I hadn't thought about going to church, I hadn't done anything like that. And then I just woke up one morning and said, right, I'm fed up of this life, I'm off to a monastery. And they let me go. And I went to Father Sophone's monastery. That was, I was 17 years old, it was still a small community, he was still alive. Archimandrite Sophone, the disciple of Saint Silouan on Mount Athos. And I went there for about 4 months, from just before Christmas to after Pascha. And I carried on teaching myself so I could do the examinations. And I worked whatever the monks asked me to do, gardening, cooking, whatever it might be. And that was my return back into the church. Without consciously deciding or thinking about it or arguing myself into it, it was just living with them brought me back into the church. Living with Sophone brought me back into the church. So having done that, I knew I wanted to study theology eventually, but I didn't want to do it as an undergraduate in England, because had I done theology as an undergraduate in England, it would have been a very particular kind of theology. You know, the Church of England theology, Protestant theology, scripture, a little bit about the early church, and then Reformation onwards. It's not what I wanted to do. But by that point I'd been reading a lot of Lossky, Florovsky, Janoras, and especially Zizoulas, Metropolitan John. And from reading him I became very fascinated by the dialogue about personalism, and especially Emmanuel Levinas and Heidegger. He's engaging with them in his work. And so I decided to go and study philosophy. And the school I went to in London had the only professor in England who was teaching Emmanuel Levinas. She had just finished her doctorate, so I was able to really study modern continental philosophy from Kant all the way through to Levinas and Derrida and others. But I knew that that was always preliminary. Then having finished that, I then went to study theology in Oxford with Bishop Callistus, Metropolitan Callistus. Studying theology with Bishop Callistus in Oxford, and I was finishing my doctoral work with him, and that's when Father John Meyendorff died. Yeah? And they wanted to find a replacement, and they had a program of trying different people for one semester, one term. They invited me to come for 1 year, just to see who I was, for me to see them, to see whether it might work. We did it for 1 year, then I went back to England, and then afterwards I was invited to come. So I came in 1995 to teach there. St. Vladimir's Seminary, we started in 1937. There's a history before that of theological education, Orthodox theological education in America, from the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, which was overseen from Russia. We've had Orthodox in America for over 200 years now. St. Herman of Alaska, a Russian missionary monk, brought Orthodoxy 250 years ago now. There's been many emigrations, there's been many Orthodox in Russia before the Russian Revolution, many Orthodox. And so they had schools. They were ecclesiastical schools, they were fairly low level. One of the rectors of those schools, Father Leonid Tukevich, who eventually became Metropolitan Leonti, he wrote a report on Orthodox theological education in the New World, about 1915. And he wrote it as a preparation for the Moscow Council of 1917-18. This was his report. And he emphasized that in America, theological students must be taught to the highest level. He said, he wrote that we do not have the right not to give a full and proper answer to those who ask us. We cannot just say, well, this is what we do and we've always done it. We have to be able to give a full and proper answer to anybody who asks us. And if we don't, we will be nothing but a sect. That's how we would appear. If we cannot speak, that's how we would appear. He drew up a whole catalogue of what the study should be like. And I always point out to my students that that programme of studies also included hygiene. But fortunately, I don't think we need to teach our students hygiene anymore, so we're beyond that. But we've taken his words to heart, that if we're going to do theological education, it really has to be to the highest level. So there were schools before the revolution. After the revolution, there was no contact, the money stopped, the schools fell apart. And then in the 1930s, they were thinking about building schools. And then in 1937, we were established at the same time as two other schools, Holy Cross in Boston, the Greek Orthodox school, and St. Tikhon's in Pennsylvania. Okay. We were always envisioned to be the academy, in the Russian system, assembly and academy, that high level. And from the beginning, we were always committed to pan-Orthodox education. Yeah? We were going to serve everybody in the country. So from the beginning, we had a board of trustees, and on the board we have bishops from every jurisdiction, from the Serbian church, from the Greek church, from the Antiochian church. We've had professors from all the different traditions, and we've had students from all the different traditions, in the conviction that ultimately Orthodoxy in America will be an American Orthodoxy. However long it takes, whether it's 5 generations, 10 generations, ultimately the church has to be embodied in America in a way that befits America. And the way to do that is to work with everybody for the betterment of all. So we come to know each other so that we work together, and we do all of that. So in 1937 we started. We were chartered by the University of New York within a few years, so we've been recognized from the beginning. And we started off in an apartment building in the Upper West Side of Manhattan by Columbia. And actually, as a matter of fact, when we first started, our library was in the toilet, it was in the bathroom. Yeah, it's a small apartment building, we had a bathroom, that's where the library was. That's where we started. 1963, we moved to where we are now in Crestwood, and we've been growing ever since. We've got wonderful new buildings, we've got lots of students, and it's changed quite a bit since I've been there. I came in 93 to begin with. When I came, there were maybe 7 or 8 apartments for married students, with their families. Now, 15 years later, we have 38 apartments for married students, which means that last year on campus, we had 70 children aged under 7, that high, living on campus, which is a very different feel. So when we come to church together and you have all the children, there's a different life that's going on at this level. Yeah. So we've been growing, we've been thriving, we've got all these students coming. Another change is that most of our students now are converts. It's not so much the people from who were born into Orthodox families and like that. We still get those, but many of our students now are converts, coming from Protestantism, from the Baptist Church, from the Catholic Church, from the Episcopal Church, from all over the place. They come to us. And in fact, we even get a few students who are not converted. Last couple of years, we had a Lutheran student, and a Baptist student, and a Catholic student, all wanting to come to learn theology with us, and then go and do whatever they do. Whatever it may be afterwards. So.
Can you tell us some words, some of your memories about very famous professors and fathers that worked on St. Vladimir Seminary? Their books are now very popular in Belgrade, in Serbia, like Šmema and Majendorf.
You're asking the wrong person, I'm afraid, because I'm the first person at St. Vladimir's who never knew them. Oh. They died, they passed away before I came. So I know of them, I know their books, I grew up in a world, in a church shaped by what they had done, but I never met them personally. We've had many other characters and wonderful professors at St. Vladimir's, Professor John Erickson, Professor Selin Kezic, especially a Serbian professor, was really, he retired maybe 10 years ago, he's still living, and he was really, really loved by all the students, not just the Serbian students, by all the students. So we've had a wide variety of professors.
But Professor Kalistver was one of your mentors, yeah?
Yes, in
He's
Oxford.
From England, yeah?
Yeah. He was my supervisor when doing doctoral work. You might want to cut this because I'm hopeless at talking about personal anecdotes and personal memories. So, okay. It was a tremendous blessing for me to work with Metropolitan Kallistos. Having come from philosophy to theology, I had to do a master's degree in theology, and it meant meeting with him every week for 2 years as we worked through the Fathers. Yeah. And then he was my doctoral supervisor after that. And I think the brilliance of Metropolitan Kallistos is shown by the fact that all his students have turned out to be quite different. Yeah? So he's allowed each person to grow in a way that fits them, and has nurtured that growth and stimulated it and respected it, rather than imposing his style upon everybody. He's nurtured people, and I think that's a mark of a real true teacher. Yeah.
Now I would like you to tell us some thoughts about your lectures that we've heard here past days in Belgrade. I wrote down one of your sentences. You said something like, the same faith is not the same through different centuries.
Oh no, the same faith, but it will be expressed differently. Yeah, the expression will be different. Because very simply the world changes. You know, very simply the world changes. The questions the world asks are different throughout the era, and so the way that we have to respond to the world, because after all, we're not here simply to preserve what we have completely sealed from any interaction. We are called to go and proclaim what we have. Yeah, just straightforwardly. Go and make all nations of all, go and make disciples of all nations, preaching and teaching and baptizing. Well, how are we going to do that without talking to people? And how are we going to talk to people without hearing where they are, what they're thinking, what kind of framework they're thinking in? So we have to, no question we have to do that. Which would be why the questions asked through history mean that there's a different emphasis throughout different parts of history. Very, very simply, you could say in the early centuries, some people argued Christ only appeared to be human, wasn't really human. So the answer, no, he really is human. A few centuries later, they said, well, maybe he's not really God. So they said, no, he really is God. The next century later, they'll say, well, how can he be both human and God? Well, then you say, well, he really is both, but he's one. Yeah. So the questions, the expression becomes different. There would also be, that's kind of more dogmatic, but there'd be other ways of fleshing out how to say each of these things will be different in times. Yeah? But it will always be centered upon Christ, the revelation of God in Christ, which is known by the Spirit, which is proclaimed through the church, into which we are baptized and commune. But how the material flesh of that has to, will reflect the time.
How can we use our Orthodox past? I mean, some people think that we just simply have to go back to past, go back to the roots.
Well, on the other hand, if you think about it, the first Christian texts, very first Christian texts we've got, the letters of St. Paul, yeah, they are already written to communities that are falling away. Yes? He's writing to the Romans, to the Corinthians, to the Thessalonians, saying, stop making mistakes. So my question would be, well, which past are you going back to? If the first texts we've got are already correcting texts. It's not simple, yeah? We are always caught in this tension between looking forward to the coming Christ, who we look at by returning to the past. And the real classic example of that, I spoke about on Monday here, is the road to Emmaus. Yeah? I always ask my students, when do the disciples finally know who Christ is? Yeah? Because in the Gospels they're pretty slow. Yeah? They keep on failing to get it. They keep on failing to get it. Yeah? And in fact, the only time before the Passion that one of the disciples gets it is when Peter says, on the road to Caesarea Philippi, Christ says, who do you say that I am? Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Yeah? Christ says, Well, you did not know this by flesh and blood. You did not know it by contact, but by a special revelation of the Father. So Peter's made the confession. Christ then says, you are Peter, Petros, rock. On this rock I will build my church. The gates of hell shall not prevail against it. What you loose will be loosed in heaven, and so on. Yeah? And then he starts to explain to Peter, now I have to go to Jerusalem to suffer. And Peter says, that will never happen to you. And then he gets called Satan. Get behind me, Satan. So the one time before the Passion, when one of the disciples makes a confession, he shows he hasn't understood it. Because 2 verses later he gets called Satan. Yeah? Satan is the one who tries to stop Christ going to the cross. Yeah? So the disciples don't get it before the Passion. At the crucifixion, they run away. Yeah? They're scared. They don't know what's happened. The person they thought was going to save them, he's been put to death. Yeah? They turn up at the empty tomb. They don't get it. The women turn up. They say, well, what's happened? Has somebody stolen the body? Yeah? They don't understand the empty tomb. It takes after all, an empty tomb is ambiguous. What does it mean? It takes an angel to say, don't you remember? He said he would rise. Now go and meet him. Go and tell the disciples. The women go back and tell the disciples. The disciples say, you got up too early this morning. You're crazy. So they don't believe it. Yeah. Yeah? Then on the road to Emmaus, the disciples are walking on the road to Emmaus, and the risen Christ turns up, and they don't recognize him. Yeah? Not only do they not recognize him, but they say, where have you been? Are you a stranger here? Haven't you heard what's been going on? We thought this Jesus was going to save us, but he went and got himself killed. And what's even more strange and perplexing, some of our company went to the tomb and they found it empty, and we don't know what to make of this. Think about it. They are telling the risen Jesus that. Yeah? Really, a point's being made in all of this. Okay? They only start to know when he opens the scriptures. Their hearts start to burn. He opens the script, meaning the Old Testament, the law, the Psalms, and the prophets. And he shows how Moses and all the prophets said that the Son of Man must suffer to enter into his glory. Their hearts start to burn, and then they know him in the breaking of bread. Yeah? Mm-hmm. And when they know him, he immediately disappears. A point is being made here. So their way of knowing who Christ is through the opening of the scriptures and the breaking of the bread. That's really important, because that is what we still do today. Yeah? In the church, we open the scriptures, yeah? In our hymnography, in the iconography, in the homily, in all the service, and we break the bread. So we are still on the road to Emmaus. Yeah? There is no historical distance. We are not at a disadvantage by being 2,000 years later, because being there didn't help them anyway. Yeah? We're not at we're still there. Yeah? But from the beginning then, it means that once they know him, they have to wait for his coming. So from the beginning, Christians are waiting for the coming of the Lord. They're not looking back, because they didn't know him when he was there. They're waiting for the coming of the Lord, and their way of knowing him is by looking at the scriptures and the breaking of the bread. Yeah? Really important dynamic going on there. And there's one more thing we can say about it, but before we get to that, in answer to your question, we now have 2,000 years of reflecting on this. So we've got a tremendous treasure in the Orthodox Church. The iconography, the liturgy, the rites, the hagiography, the works of the Church Fathers. All of this has helped unpack that mystery. Yeah? But all of it should serve to keep us focused to the future, not the past. Because we're still waiting for his coming. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes, of
course. And one can do more then. It's as Christ passes out of this world that we come to know who he is. Yeah? As his exodus out of this world, we come to know who he is. To the extent that we pass out of the world, by taking up the cross, by dying in baptism, by decreasing, as St. John the Baptist says, he passes back into the world in us. We are his body now. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So I no longer live, Christ lives in me. We are his body. But only to the extent that we ourselves die to this world. Yeah? because there's one really other important thing that needs to be said.
Yes.
And that is, it's not just through the opening scriptures and breaking the bread, it is after the event of the Passion, the crucifixion, resurrection. Christ has trampled down death by his death. Yeah? It's not that he died because he's God, because he's man, but because he's God, he can get himself out of the tomb. You know, that would be great for him, but it wouldn't help anybody else. He shows us what it is to be God by the way that he dies as a human being. Now, if you think about that, that is just, it makes you silent, makes you lost for words. He shows us what it is to be God by the way he dies as a human being. By that which expresses all our brokenness, our fallenness, our weakness, our impotence, the fact that we're going to die whatever we do. He actually shows us a way of using that death in a way which is divine. Yeah? So we are all, to use Heidegger's words, we are all thrown into this world. Nobody asked me whether I wanted to be born. Nobody did. I've been thrown into this world in which whatever I do, I will die. However good I make myself, I will die. However, whatever, I will die. Yeah? So the only question really in life is, how are you going to use your death? Because it's the only question you will have to answer. Because everything else may come and go. But that is a certainty. Yeah? And what Christ has shown is a way of using our death to bring about life. So we now can voluntarily take up our cross, die in baptism, to bring life to ourselves and to others. Yeah? We have to be able to articulate that. That is a mystery which is articulated through the centuries in different formulations, I think.
If you can tell us some more things about our modern times in which we live. They say in past 10 years life is so changed that we cannot recognize it. You said on your lectures there is an explosion of knowledge, and if I may add, there is also explosion of media, of arts, of not arts, of so many things. So modern theologist, do he has to be locked in his library or to know everything and to...
Well, I hope not, because I think it's not possible now to know everything. You know, maybe 200 years ago you could read all the books that were printed. Now it's impossible. It's impossible even within just theology to read all the books. Okay, so there has to be more than that. There has to be much more than that. There has been an absolute explosion of knowledge, of media, of communication, of images, of thoughts, of all the rest of it. What there hasn't been is integration. Yeah, there's been fragmentation, but no integration. Even within a discipline like theology, there's been fragmentation. Scripture studies, patristic studies, historical studies, liturgy studies, all these different things, very rarely talking to each other. Yeah? Within philosophy, likewise, many different disciplines. And then between theology and philosophy, even more so. So it's all been fragmented in different ways. We absolutely have to be able to find a way to provide an integrated vision, which doesn't necessarily mean synthesizing everything, because that's not possible, but finding an integrated vision which enables us to bring meaning and coherence to life now. And ultimately, I think it would be centered upon the question of death, because that's the only inescapable reality for everybody. But maybe that's too Heideggerian or too Freudian, I don't know. But nevertheless, that's the only unescapable reality, and the way that life can be brought out of death. Yeah.
You wrote some books about sexualism in the modern times. So could you tell us something about
I didn't. I wrote a book on asceticism and anthropology in Clement and Irenaeus, two 2nd century figures. It was the original title was Sexuality and Asceticism. When it became published, it was Asceticism and Anthropology. But that was 2nd century figures, not on the modern world. Not only has there been an explosion of knowledge in the modern world, but especially in the West, there's been an explosion of, since the 1960s, of sexual liberation and everything that follows on from that. Yeah, and that's really probably the most challenging aspect for us today.
Yeah, I think Roman Catholic Pope said that we are living in pan-sexual civilization.
Yes, yeah.
So,
so we need to be able to, as a Orthodox theologian, articulate a positive vision for sexuality. It's not enough to say sexuality should only exist between males and females in marriage for the sake of procreation. It's not enough just to say a limiting vision, because that's not enough. No one will listen to it. It doesn't provide people means by which to live. Yeah? So we have to find a way of articulating a positive expression about the truth of being human as male and female. And there's been some interesting work done on that. You might know there's a lot of work done in modern Orthodox theology about otherness. You know, otherness, persons in communion, the one and the other, and so on. There have been some people writing recently that has all been articulated as a male discourse. Yeah? It's one and the many, not one and the other. Yeah? Male and female. And what that might look like, and what that might look like respecting the otherness of the female, not simply as the other of the male. Yeah? So there's a whole lot of work to be done on that. But I've got no answers for that yet.
Do asceticism mean something to us, to modern world, to ordinary people? There is a Greek author who made Asceticism or Schizophrenia book.
Right. Yeah. It should do. We were talking earlier about our entry into the mystery of Christ being through death, taking up the cross, learning to die to oneself, to our egos, to our passions, and so on. You get a similar kind of picture in Kant, Immanuel Kant, where it really starts in modernity. He points out that freedom is actually manifest in the ability to say no. Think about it. It's not freedom of choice, this chair, or this dress, or this dress, but actually in the ability to say no. It's only when we are not driven by our desires and our instincts, living like animals, that we actually show ourselves to be human. And that means the ability to say no to a desire or to an instinct or to an impulse. Yeah? So Kant already says that. It's really interesting. Freedom is manifest in the ability to say no, and here you see the true human person emerging. So there's a lot in that. And when people tell me that asceticism is a thing of the past or so on, I'm always reminded about one of the campaigns, I think in America or England, I don't remember which, against drugs. Yeah? And there was a whole thing, is in England, just say no. Yeah? It became a slogan in the 80s and 90s, just say no. Yeah? Say no to drugs, say no to whatever else. But how can a culture whose slogan is just say no think it has not got a place for asceticism? Yeah, I mean, clearly already. So I think it's something intrinsic to human existence, something we've lost, and I think probably the economic crisis and so, as a result of consumerism has shown us that we've lost it. Yeah, we're very unable to say no, especially in the West. Yeah, I want another car, I want another house, I want another television, I want another... And we do it all on instant gratification. It's not, I will save up till I can get another car. It is, let me get another car on credit, on paid off. And then you end up with all the debt and all the problems that you see, wreaking havoc in the world today. Yeah? That's a result of consumerism, which is a result of greed. I've been writing a series of books called The Formation of Christian Theology. I wrote a book called The Way to Nicaea, the first 3 centuries, a book called The Nicene Faith, on the 4th century. Then I wrote a book called The Mystery of Christ, which summarizes what I learned from writing those 2 books. And my next book will be on To Chalcedon and Beyond, so textbooks for students. Before writing that, I have a book which is coming out next year with Oxford on Diodor and Theodore, really abstract, academic, Greek, Syriac, Latin, Armenian, really. But I had to do that before writing the next book. So I'm writing a series of books, coming out of my lectures, coming out of my teaching for the students as textbooks. I think if there were any area I myself am working on, this summer I started reading philosophy again. After 20 years of reading I've gone back to reading philosophy. And I've set myself the task of reading from Kant all the way through to Gadamer, all the writers. And reading Kant has been exhilarating and really fun and really stimulating. The idea we just mentioned about freedom, comes out of Kant's Second Critique. So I want to take that kind of work up and help me find the right kind of words and way of thinking or expression to be able to convey what I've learnt from reading the Fathers in a modern idiom, to be able to address people in a really clear way.
Was Kant religious?
In his own way. I mean, really, quite what that would mean in the late 18th century in Prussia. He defended religion, but it's religion within the bounds of reason, which actually means he defines the area of reason, and religion is everything else.
Okay, thank you very much. When are you coming to Belgrade again?
Hopefully next year. Hopefully next year.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Proszę